A Harlem Public Library, 1950, Malcolm X sits reading a Latin philosophy text. The white director watches from across the room, shaking her head. After 15 minutes of watching him pretend, she decides to expose him, walks directly to his table, leans down and quietly says that Latin is very difficult, and he shouldn't feel bad if he doesn't understand it. Suggests some simpler books that might be more his level. Malcolm closes the book, looks directly at her. What happens in the next 10 seconds destroys every assumption she made. But before we get to what Malcolm said, if you're enjoying stories about moments when intelligence destroys assumptions, when people who are underestimated prove everyone wrong, please hit that subscribe button. These stories matter because they show us that education and intellect don't come with a particular face or background. Hit the like button if you want more content that challenges how we think about knowledge and who gets to be called educated. Now let's find out exactly what Malcolm said to that library director. The library is on 135th Street, a three-story brick building that's been serving Harlem for 30 years. The main reading room is on the second floor, high ceilings, tall windows letting in afternoon light, rows of wooden tables, shelves packed with books covering every wall, the smell of old paper and furniture polish, the quiet hush that libraries maintain, the sound of pages turning, occasional coughs, whispered conversations at the reference desk. It's a Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock, the library is moderately busy, maybe 20 people scattered throughout the reading room. Students doing homework, elderly men reading newspapers, a few women browsing the fiction section, and Malcolm X sitting at a corner table near the philosophy section, completely absorbed in a Latin text. Malcolm is 25 years old, recently released from prison. He spent 6 years in Charlestown State Prison and Norfolk Prison Colony. Most of that time, he spent educating himself, reading everything he could access, copying entire pages from the dictionary to improve his vocabulary and handwriting, studying philosophy, history, religion, science, teaching himself Latin and some Greek, transforming himself from a street hustler into a disciplined intellectual. Now he's out, living in Detroit with his brother Wilfred, working at a furniture store during the day, coming to New York on weekends for Nation of Islam activities, spending every free moment reading. Libraries are his sanctuary, his classroom, his university. He's wearing a simple dark suit, white shirt, thin tie. His clothes are clean but inexpensive. His glasses are wire-rimmed, slightly bent on one side. He sits with perfect posture, spine straight, shoulders back, one hand holding the book, the other taking notes in a small notebook. His handwriting is meticulous, neat rows of observations, translations, questions to research later. The book he's reading is Marcus Tullius Cicero's De Officiis, On Duties, a philosophical work about ethics, moral responsibility, and proper conduct, written in 44 BC, one of the most influential texts in Western philosophy, and Malcolm is reading it in the original Latin, not a translation, not a simplified version, the actual Latin text that Cicero wrote 2,000 years ago. The library director's name is Mrs. Dorothy Hartwell. She's 53 years old, been working in libraries for 28 years. Started as a shelf, worked her way up to reference librarian, then assistant director, now director of this branch. She's proud of her career, proud of her knowledge, proud of the fact that she has a master's degree in library science from Columbia University. She sees herself as a guardian of knowledge, someone who helps people access information, someone who serves her community. But her community in her mind has clear boundaries, clear categories, clear assumptions about who can understand what. She's worked in Harlem for 15 years. She's seen thousands of patrons. She's developed without quite realizing it a set of expectations about what different people are capable of understanding, and those expectations are deeply rooted in prejudice she would never admit to having. When she sees a black man sitting with a Latin philosophy text, her immediate assumption is that he's pretending, that he's selected an impressive-looking book to create an appearance of education, that he's sitting there hoping people will think he's smart. She's seen it before, she tells herself. People trying to look educated, holding books they can't possibly understand, It's sad, really. They should just be honest about their level and start with something appropriate. She watches Malcolm for 15 minutes, watches him turn pages at a steady pace. Watches him write in his notebook. Watches him occasionally pause, stare at the ceiling, thinking through something complex. All of this, in her mind, is performance, an elaborate act. She feels a mixture of pity and irritation. Pity because she thinks he's insecure about his education. Irritation because he's occupying a valuable text that someone else might actually be able to use. Finally, she decides to intervene, to gently redirect him, to help him understand that it's okay to start with easier material to save him from this embarrassing charade. She stands up from her desk, smooths her skirt, walks across the reading room. Her shoes make soft clicks on the wooden floor. She approaches Malcolm's table from the side. He doesn't look up. He's in the middle of a complex passage. Citro is arguing about the relationship between the useful and the honorable, about whether actions that benefit us personally can be moral if they harm others, about how to resolve conflicts between self-interest and ethics. Malcolm is parsing the Latin carefully. Each word matters. Each grammatical construction reveals nuance. Mrs. Hartwell clears her throat softly. Malcolm continues reading. She clears her throat again, slightly louder. Still no response. He's genuinely absorbed, not ignoring her, just completely focused on the text in front of him. This annoys her further. She interprets his focus as stubbornness, as him refusing to acknowledge that he's been caught in his pretense. She leans down slightly, speaks in a quiet voice that she thinks sounds kind, but actually drips with condescension, tells him that Latin is very difficult, says it requires years of classical education to understand, says he shouldn't feel bad if he doesn't understand it, says many people struggle with ancient languages, suggests that perhaps he'd like her to show him some other books that might be more appropriate for his level. She emphasizes the word appropriate in a way that makes clear she means easier, simpler, more suited to someone like him. Malcolm stops reading. His finger marks his place on the page. He doesn't move for a moment, just sits there, processing what was just said to him, understanding immediately what's happening, what assumptions are being made, what prejudice is being politely expressed. He closes the book slowly, sets it down on the table, removes his reading glasses, folds them carefully, places them on top of the book. Then he looks up at Mrs. Hartwell, direct eye contact, calm expression, no anger visible on his face, no defensiveness, no hurt, just a steady measuring gaze. What he says next is delivered in a quiet voice, the same volume she used, but where her tone was condescending, his is precise, clinical, like a surgeon making an incision. He explains, without any introduction or preamble, the exact philosophical argument Citro is making in the section he was just reading. He summarizes it in clear, accessible English. Then he quotes 3 lines from the text, in Latin, from memory, perfect pronunciation. Then he translates those lines, word by word, explaining the grammatical construction, pointing out a particular verb tense that English doesn't have an exact equivalent for, discussing why that verb tense matters to Citro's argument. Then he mentions that this particular copy of De Officiis has a small error on page 47. The Latin word utilitas is printed as utilitas, a minor typographical error that most readers wouldn't notice. But Malcolm noticed, because he's not pretending to read Latin. He's actually reading it, understanding it, analyzing it at a level that requires genuine fluency. Then he points out something more significant. He mentions that the English translation printed at the bottom of the page, provided for reference, is slightly inaccurate. The translator rendered a particular phrase as common good, when the Latin more precisely means public utility. A subtle difference, but one that changes the nuance of Citro's argument. Malcolm explains why this matters, how it relates to Citro's broader political philosophy, how it connects to debates about the relationship between individual rights and collective benefit. He delivers all of this in about 90 seconds. Calm, measured. No showmanship, no gloating, just demonstrating, clearly and undeniably, that he understands this text better than she could, that his education, though self-taught and acquired in prison, is real, that her assumptions about what someone who looks like him can understand are completely, embarrassingly wrong. Mrs. Hartwell's face goes through several changes during those 90 seconds. First confusion, then shock, then a deep, uncomfortable red flush that starts at her collar and spreads up to her cheeks. She's a librarian. She's supposed to know about books. She studied literature and philosophy in graduate school. She took 2 semesters of Latin, and this man, this young black man, she assumed was illiterate, just demonstrated knowledge that exceeds her own. She opens her mouth, closes it, opens it again. No words come out. She's trying to formulate an apology, trying to find a way to salvage the situation, but there's no way to salvage it. She revealed her prejudice, made assumptions based purely on his appearance, and got proven wrong in the most definitive way possible. Malcolm picks up his glasses, puts them back on, opens the book to where his finger was marking the page, returns to reading. The dismissal is clear. The conversation is over. She's been politely, but thoroughly shown the door. Mrs. Hartwell stands there for another 5 seconds, then turns and walks back to her desk. Her face is still red. She sits down, stares at the papers in front of her without seeing them. She feels humiliated, angry at herself, angry at Malcolm for making her feel this way, even though she knows rationally that he did nothing wrong. She just revealed her own bigotry and got confronted with evidence that destroyed it. For the next hour, she keeps glancing at Malcolm, watching him read, watching him take notes. He never looks up, never acknowledges her again, just continues his work with the same focused intensity, and every glance reminds her of her mistake, reminds her that her assumptions about who can be educated are based on prejudice, not reality. Other patrons in the library notice the tension, notice Mrs. Hartwell's discomfort, notice her repeatedly glancing at the young black man in the corner. They don't know what happened, but they can sense something occurred, some kind of confrontation or revelation. At 5 o'clock, Malcolm closes his book, gathers his notebook and pen, stands up, walks to the shelving area, and carefully returns the Cicero to its proper place in the philosophy section. Then he walks toward the exit, passes Mrs. Hartwell's desk, doesn't stop, doesn't say goodbye, just walks past, down the stairs, out into the Harlem afternoon. Mrs. Hartwell watches him leave, feels something she can't quite name, relief that he's gone, shame about what happened, and underneath both, a grudging respect she doesn't want to feel, because it forces her to question other assumptions she's made over 15 years of working in this library. That evening, Mrs. Hartwell goes home to her apartment in the Upper West Side, makes dinner, sits in her living room with a book she's not really reading. She keeps thinking about the interaction, keeps replaying it in her mind, keeps seeing Malcolm's calm face as he demonstrated knowledge she didn't think he could possess. She starts questioning other moments, other patrons she redirected away from difficult books. Other times she made assumptions about what people could understand based on how they looked. How many times did she do what she did to Malcolm? How many people did she condescend to? How many times was she wrong but never got corrected? The questions make her uncomfortable, make her see herself differently, make her realize she's been failing at the very thing she thought she was good at. She thought she was helping people access knowledge, but actually she was gatekeeping, deciding who deserved access to what based on prejudiced assumptions. She doesn't sleep well that night. Malcolm, meanwhile, goes back to his brother's house in Detroit that weekend. He mentions the library incident to Wilfred in passing, not as something important, just as an anecdote. Another example of people underestimating him. Another moment of having to prove himself. It's so common it barely registers as significant. Wilfred asks if Malcolm corrected her gently or harshly. Malcolm says he just showed her what he knew. Didn't insult her, didn't humiliate her, just demonstrated the truth. That's all that was needed. The truth itself was enough to make the point. Wilfred nods. He's seen his brother do this many times, seen him face assumption after assumption, prejudice after prejudice, and respond not with anger but with demonstration, with proof, with undeniable evidence that the assumptions are wrong. 6 months later, Malcolm returns to that same library, not because he expects anything, just because it's a good library with a strong philosophy section. He needs to access some texts on Islamic philosophy that he can't find elsewhere. So he goes back. Mrs. Hartwell is still the director. She's at her desk when Malcolm enters. She recognizes him immediately. Her face shows a complex set of emotions. Embarrassment, nervousness, but also something else, something that might be resolved. Malcolm walks to the philosophy section, finds the books he needs, brings them to a table, sits down, starts reading, same routine as before. After about 30 minutes, Mrs. Hartwell approaches his table. Malcolm sees her coming, tenses slightly, preparing for another confrontation, but her demeanor is different this time. She's not condescending, she's not patronizing. She looks genuinely uncomfortable, like she's about to do something difficult. She reaches his table, stands there for a moment, then speaks quietly, tells him she owes him an apology, says what she did 6 months ago was wrong, says she made assumptions based on prejudice, says she's been thinking about it ever since, says she's tried to be more aware of her biases, more careful about her assumptions, says she knows an apology doesn't undo the harm, but she wanted him to know she recognizes what she did was wrong. Malcolm looks up at her, studies her face, sees genuine remorse, sees someone who actually did the work of self-examination, who actually questioned her assumptions, instead of just feeling bad and moving on. He nods slightly, thanks her for the apology, tells her that awareness is the first step, that everyone has biases, that what matters is whether we examine them or whether we let them continue unchallenged. She nods, thanks him, returns to her desk. They don't become friends, they don't have further conversations, but from that day forward, when Malcolm comes to the library, Mrs. Hartwell treats him with respect. Not special treatment, just respect. The respect she should have shown from the beginning. The respect she now tries to show to all patrons, regardless of what assumptions her biases might whisper. Years later, after Malcolm becomes famous, Mrs. Hartwell recognizes him in newspaper photographs, realizes the young man she condescended to is now a national figure. She tells the story to colleagues, not proudly, as a confession about her own prejudice, as a warning about assumptions. The story spreads through library circles as a teaching moment, an example of what happens when assumptions guide how we treat people. The story matters not because Malcolm X did something extraordinary. He was just reading a book, studying a text, doing what any educated person does. The story matters because of what Mrs. Hartwell assumed, because her assumptions are not unique. They're common, pervasive, built into systems and institutions in ways most people never examine. Malcolm X understood this, understood that individual prejudice is just a symptom of systemic prejudice, that Mrs. Hartwell's assumptions came from somewhere, from a society that taught her subtly and constantly who can be smart and who cannot, who deserves access to knowledge and who should be redirected to simpler material. That's why he didn't waste energy being angry at her personally. The problem wasn't one library director. The problem was the whole system that shaped her assumptions. The system that makes people like Malcolm have to constantly prove themselves, have to constantly demonstrate that they have a right to access knowledge, have to constantly overcome assumptions that they shouldn't be in advanced philosophy sections, shouldn't be reading Latin, shouldn't be taking up space meant for serious scholars. If this story made you think about assumptions you make about who can understand what, consider examining those assumptions. Consider whether your judgments about people's capabilities are based on evidence or prejudice. Consider who benefits from keeping certain knowledge restricted to certain people. Consider what we lose when we assume intelligence has a particular face. Subscribe for more stories about the moments when assumptions meet reality. Hit the like button if you believe education belongs to anyone willing to do the work, regardless of what they look like or where they come from.